You know, there's this question that just gets under your skin. It's at the heart of so many books and movies and nightmares. What actually creates a serial killer? Well, today, we're going to push past all the speculation and really dive into the science. We're going to lean on this really incredible 2014 study to see what the research actually says.
And this is the big one, right? It's that age-old question, nature versus nurture, but cranked up to a terrifying level. Is it just a bad seed from the start? Or is it a poisoned environment that creates the monster? And what we're about to find out is, well, it's not that simple. It's not one or the other. It's this really disturbing mix of both.
Researchers call it a perfect storm of factors in their childhood. And here you can see some of the classic warning signs. You've got things like cruelty to animals, setting fires, and persistent bedwetting. That's the famous McDonald triad you might have heard of. Then you have things like horrific abuse or really intense, complicated relationships with their mothers. But here's the part that really gives me chills. A shocking number of these killers come from totally stable, even loving homes. And that tells us there's no single recipe. It's a scary combination of biology, psychology, and, as we're about to see, opportunity.
All right, so let's start from the outside and work our way in. First up, the world around them. We're talking about opportunity. Because think about it, even the most driven predator needs the right place to hunt.
Okay, so there's this big idea in sociology that really helps explain this. It's called routine activity theory. And honestly, it boils crime down to its absolute basics. It says, for a crime to happen, you just need 3 things to line up perfectly. Someone who wants to do it, a target that's available, and nobody around to stop them. That's it. Simple, and kind of terrifying when you think about it.
So let's break that down. First, you gotta have a pool of potential victims. Easy targets. Second, you need places to hide, remote areas, empty buildings, anywhere you can do the deed without getting caught. And third, the population itself is a huge factor. A big, anonymous city where no one knows their neighbors, that is the perfect camouflage. Put those 3 things together, and you've basically created the ideal hunting ground.
And look, this isn't just some academic theory. The numbers back it up big time. The study we're looking at points out that places like California and Florida, with their huge sprawling areas and transient populations, they have serial murder rates that are 3 to 5 times higher than states like New York. It's a really stark reminder that the environment, the where, can make all the difference.
Okay, so if the outside world is the hunting ground, then what's going on inside the hunter? Now we're going to peel back that layer and go deep inside the killer's mind. This is the engine that drives the whole thing. This quote from Robert Simon, it just hits you right between the eyes. Bad men do what good men dream. And what the research shows is something a little uncomfortable for all of us. A lot of normal people have dark thoughts, maybe even violent fantasies. But for most of us, that's where it stays, just a thought. So the real question is, what pushes someone over that edge? What makes them actually cross that line?
Well, according to researcher Louis Schlesinger, every single one of these cases has 3 psychological pillars holding it up. It all starts with fantasy, intense fantasy, where they play it all out in their head, over and over again, like a mental rehearsal. Then, that fantasy gets tangled up with sexual sadism, where the thrill comes from the victim's fear, from that feeling of total power. And when you mix those 2 together, it builds into this crushing pressure, this compulsion to act that they feel can only be released by making that fantasy horrifyingly real. So, how on earth do they justify this to themselves? Well, they build these twisted belief systems. Psychologists call them implicit theories, and you can see them right here. They convince themselves the world is a bad place, so their victims had it coming. Or, hey, our urges are uncontrollable, that's just how guys are. Or that women are just objects. Or my personal favorite, I'm entitled, I take what I want. This isn't insanity, folks. It's a terrifyingly rational, self-serving logic that gives them the green light.
All right, so we've covered the environment, we've covered the psychology, now we're going to the deepest level of all, the brain itself, the hardware. Is something just wired differently inside a serial killer's head? Okay, so scientists basically see 2 kinds of aggression. You've got your hot-blooded type. Think of a spontaneous bar fight, all emotion and reaction. But that's not where serial killers live. They operate almost exclusively in this other mode, cold-blooded, predatory aggression. This is different. It's planned, it's calm, it's totally detached. The goal isn't to prove a point. The goal is just to kill. So how does that predatory drive get so out of control? There's this really fascinating theory called the kindling effect. And the idea is that the emotional parts of the brain, they're like a muscle. The more you work them out with fantasies, the stronger and more sensitive they get.
So with every mental rehearsal, the bar for committing actual violence gets lower and lower and lower. That leap from thought to action just gets easier every time.
The paper uses this perfect analogy for it. Think of the early fantasies as kindling or tinder. You know, the little twigs that catch fire really easily. That process kindles the brain. It primes the pump. And once that tinder is burning hot, it makes it way, way easier for the big logs, the actual act of murder, to catch fire. And that's how a dark little thought can grow into this raging, unstoppable inferno. And what's so wild is that this brain science shows up right at the crime scene. You have your organized killers, right? The ones who plan everything down to the last detail. Well, they tend to have intact frontal lobes. The part of your brain that's like the CEO. It lets them plan, strategize, and stay in control. But then you have your disorganized killers, and they often have damage to that same area. This leads to those chaotic, impulsive, messy crime scenes. It's literally the difference in brain hardware showing up in the police report.
Okay, so we've got all this theory. What does it actually mean when it hits the real world of courtrooms and police investigations? It really all comes down to that ancient question. Is this person mad, or are they just bad?
You know the scene. We've all seen it a million times on TV. The genius profiler walks into the room, takes one look around, and basically downloads the killer's entire life story. It makes for amazing television, but how well does it actually work in real life?
Yeah, the data is a little less glamorous. A huge study of FBI cases from back in '84 found that while profiling can be helpful, for pointing detectives in the right direction, it directly identified the bad guy in only about 17% of cases. So it's a piece of the puzzle for sure, but it's not the silver bullet we see in the movies. So that brings us to the other big, flashing question in the courtroom. With everything we know about their minds and brains, could a serial killer be legally insane? And the answer from all the research is a resounding almost never. And the reason is pretty simple. The legal definition of insanity is incredibly strict. Most of the tests, like the ones you see here, really just ask two things. One, did they know what they were doing was wrong? And two, could they stop themselves if they wanted to? And here's the kicker. Having a mental disorder, even a really serious one, isn't enough to prove you couldn't do either of those things. And here's the great irony of it all. The very things that make someone a serial killer, the careful planning, the stalking, the covering their tracks, all of that is perfect evidence that they know exactly what they're doing is wrong. Their actions aren't some out-of-control psychotic break, they are the definition of cold, calculated, predatory violence. And that's why, in the eyes of the law, they aren't mad, they're just evil.
So let's end this by flipping the camera around and pointing it at ourselves, because the study leaves us with this one last, really unsettling idea. For a detective to catch a killer, they have to get inside their head, right? They have to think like a criminal. And the fact that we can do that a human being can empathize with that mindset, it suggests that maybe this kind of darkness isn't as foreign to our nature as we'd like to believe. Which leaves you with the final haunting question, what does our ability to understand the monster, even just a little bit, tell us about the fine line between good and evil that runs through every single one of us?